Bonjour sur le plateau.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. We're very, very happy to have Professor Farsalinos with us this morning, and of course one of the main scientists and researcher on e-cigarettes. So, it is a great honor to have him here. And we'll deal with some data coming from European community, and mainly it's the Eurobarometer and very important data which deal with actually a survey carried out with the Commission. They started this kind of survey in 1973. They are very important data. They represent a database linked to the expertise and the knowledge of all this field. And of course it's made for consumers, for politicians, and this year we have great data. So the survey was made at the end of 2014, and data were introduced at the beginning of 2015, and the Commission just announced that a lot of people just quit smoking thanks to the e-cigarette. And you will see a lot of data, a lot of interesting facts here, and in fact when you have data like 14% of vapers stopped smoking, so that's really important, for example. So we'll enter in details, and Dr. Farsalinos will of course be our guide through this survey, making a focus also on France, and we'll deal with all these topics. Thank you. You have the floor, Dr. Farsalinos.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to this huge vape expo. It's really huge. So, the Eurobarometer is an opinion poll performed within the EU. It asks about several subjects, one of which is tobacco use and opinion about tobacco products. The first Eurobarometer on tobacco products was performed in 1997. And of course, the questions as well as the participating countries change over time depending on the expansion of the European Union. So this is how smoking is progressing in Europe since 2002, where we had a prevalence rate of smoking of about 40%, and in 2014 it has gone down to about 26%, a 2% reduction compared to the previous Eurobarometer, which was in 2012. Of course, men smoke more than women, as expected. So according to the survey, the prevalence of tobacco cigarette use was 26%, with 28% being in the previous Eurobarometer. 20% were ex-smokers, so people who were smoking in the past but they have quit, and 54% were never smokers, they have never tried any cigarette. The quit smoking methods that are used in European Union, in most cases they don't use any assistance. Smokers try to quit by themselves, and e-cigarettes are the third option right now within the EU. 10% of the smokers, whether they fail or they succeed, use e-cigarettes to quit smoking as a method for quitting smoking. So it's the third place for now. Now, these data are far more than what the European Union has announced. So we got the database from all the participants. It was more than 20,000 participants from all over the European Union. And this is an analysis going much deeper than what the European Union reported, and compared to what you can also find on the websites of the European Union. So it's the first time that we analyzed, and we are the first, and it's the first time that we are presenting this data. These data are going to be published in a scientific journal. So we measured which are the predictors of e-cigarette use, which means what are the chances of being an e-cigarette user depending on your smoking status. So what you see here is that current smokers are 19 times more likely to use e-cigarettes compared to never smokers. Ex-smokers are 5 times more likely to use e-cigarettes compared to never smokers. And the combined use of current and ex-smokers have a 12 times higher chance of being an e-cigarette user compared to a never smoker. Other predictors are age. We found that compared to the age of, in comparison with age more than 55, younger people have more chance of using the e-cigarette. So basically, in most likely the ages of use are 15 to 39, but also in the age group of 40 to 55 to 54, the chance of being an e-cigarette user is almost 3 times higher than being older than 55. Also, there is a 30% greater chance of being an e-cigarette smoker when you are a male compared to females. So males are more commonly using e-cigarettes compared to females. Not a big difference, but statistically significant. Another very interesting fact is, relates to e-cigarette use and education. Usually smokers have a lower educational status compared to never smokers, but for e-cigarette users, we're seeing that the more educated, the more likely they are to be using e-cigarettes. So it's something different compared to what we see usually with smoking. And about social class, basically it's the middle class that is mostly using e-cigarettes. A very important thing is that advertisements increase the chance of using e-cigarettes. So people who have seen e-cigarette advertisements over the past 12 months, the people who are often seeing such advertisements have almost 4 times bigger chance of using e-cigarettes, and also the smokers who are occasionally seeing e-cigarette ads compared to those who never see ads. So basically, this thing shows that advertisements and marketing is important in attracting people to use e-cigarettes. That's why it shouldn't be banned, although the TPD is banning e-cigarette marketing and advertisements.
Alors, Konstantinos, je parle en français, vous allez avoir la traduction.
You will have the translation. What is important in this data you've showed, we can, hear regularly in politicians' speeches, mainly in California, that e-cigarette will attract young people, and in fact the proof is that marketing and advertisement is linked, for these youngsters. What do you answer to this kind of idea?
Eurobarometer refers to the population of 15 years old and older. So it includes high school children, basically, but not anything lower than that. However, on the next slide, it is important because we're going to see which part of the population is using e-cigarettes. So what's the impact of the e-cigarette use in smokers, in ex-smokers, and in never smokers? And that's the important thing to see. What's the penetration of e-cigarette use in the non-smoking population, which is something we are worried about. But as you will see, in Europe, there is basically no issue. Also in France, there's basically no issue. And I will show real numbers of number of users who are smokers or who are never smokers and are using e-cigarettes. I think that advertisements, okay, they may influence youngsters, but right now, the whole discussion about youth use of e-cigarettes is purely theoretical because no one has ever established that young people are regular users of e-cigarettes, and not even that they are using nicotine-containing e-cigarettes. So unless they change the way they ask the question, they define current e-cigarette use as taking one puff in the last 30 days. That's not regular use. And that's where all this misinformation is coming from a bad question in the survey, basically. So another, finally, for current e-cigarette use, which means for people who are now using regularly e-cigarettes. Again, current smokers are almost 19 times higher chance of being current e-cigarette users compared to never smokers. And for ex-smokers, almost 12 times bigger chance. For past e-cigarette use, again, current smokers and ex-smokers have used e-cigarettes in the past. And even for trial, mostly current and ex-smokers are trying e-cigarettes compared to never smokers. And now here are the interesting data for you. Less statistics, more numbers. This is the total number of users of e-cigarettes in the European Union. So it's almost 7.5 million current users, about 11 million past regular users. They have used e-cigarettes in the past, but not right now. And more than 30 million who have just tried e-cigarettes at some point in the past.
Quand même, 7 millions.
7 million of users in Europe, it's the number of smokers in the whole world, right?
Here is about 48 million who have tried or are using.
On a 7 millions de vapoteurs aujourd'hui en Europe.
Half millions now using regularly e-cigarettes. That's what's coming out from the data.
D'accord.
In the whole Europe, there are more than 7 million smokers in Europe.
Le
Much
nombre de morts, pardon.
Number of death linked to tobacco.
Number of deaths linked to tobacco in the European Union is about 700,000 per year. Here is the number of e-cigarette users according to their smoking status. And we're talking about total e-cigarette use, current, past, or trial. So you are seeing that 34.5 million are current smokers, almost 9 million former smokers. So the total number of former and current smokers who have tried e-cigarettes is 43 million, and only 5 million are never smokers. So about 88% are smokers, current or ex-smokers who have tried e-cigarettes, and about 12% are never smokers. What's even more important is about current use. So you see that current and former smokers are about 7 million compared to 500,000 who are never smokers. So it's 92% of current users are smokers, current or former.
Mais alors, est-ce qu'il faut s'inquiéter?
Shall we worry about that? It's very positive, but is there a part of these users, e-cig users, which are ex or former smokers? So shall we understand that these people, at the end of the day, would never have taken any tobacco or e-cigarette? It's if they, would have stick to no smoking at all, just getting out of, addiction. So and of course, these products will reduce risk as compared to tobacco. But is it a failure or victory? Shall we worry about this data about ex and former smokers?
In order to understand that, you need to evaluate how many of the current smokers have reduced smoking. So they are what we call dual users. Yes. So it depends on whether they are reducing smoking and how much they are reducing smoking. Of course, these cigarettes don't have a 100% success rate, and this is obvious. Here it shows that most e-cigarette users fail to quit. But the success rate is much bigger than what we have seen with other methods, as I will show later. The thing of concern is the never smokers. So these people have never tried tobacco cigarettes, but they use e-cigarettes. So the important thing is whether they're using it, daily, which is 500,000 out of 7 million of the others. So it's less than 10%, which is quite fine, I think. You have more than 90%, which is the intended population. You expect some people who have never smoked to use a cigarette. It's a new product. Many think it's a new trend. But I think that the percentage is very low, so currently there is absolutely no concern. Especially when I will show later what's happening with nicotine-containing e-cigarettes. Because one of the main reasons for concern is whether these people will become addicted to nicotine from e-cigarettes and then go to tobacco cigarettes. But I will show data specifically about nicotine. So you see, these are numbers which the EU hasn't presented, and it's coming from an in-depth analysis of the whole database. And there are many, many interesting facts that you're going to see later. So here is nicotine use. And you can see that out of 37 million people who are using nicotine, who have used nicotine e-cigarettes, 34.3 million are current or ex-smokers, and only about 3 million are former smokers. So again, 92-93% of ever users, which means current, past, or experimenters, are using nicotine-containing e-cigarettes and are smokers, 92% of them, 93. More interestingly, and that's a very important question, the EU asked about the frequency of nicotine use. And this is extremely interesting because if you see with never smokers, a very, very small fraction is using e-cigarettes with nicotine daily, another very small fraction weekly, monthly or less than monthly, and the biggest majority, so 90% of the never smokers, have just tried once a nicotine-containing cigarette. So, in total, from the whole population of vapers, less than 2% of vapers who have used nicotine regularly are never smokers. 98% is former or current smokers. And this is a very important question, which you don't see, for example, in the surveys in the US, but it shows that even for nicotine in cigarettes, most of the never smokers just tried it, out of curiosity. You can take a puff from your friend. That doesn't make you an e-cigarette user. So basically, we have absolutely no problem of these people becoming addicted because they have just tried it once. And the daily use is just 200,000, a very small number compared to, you see how many are current and former smokers who are using it. It's a huge difference.
Est-ce que
Do these American data that we handle and which are, following maybe these European data, so are the American data following this idea?
American data, unfortunately, don't even ask about nicotine. You don't, make a differentiation between nicotine and non-nicotine. And also, they have never asked about frequency of nicotine use. So as I told you, they define current user as someone who has taken at least one puff in the past 30 days. So if last week I tried it from a friend, I'm a current user, although I may have never tried it again. And that's the big difference. The questionnaire from the Eurobarometer is much better in detail because you make the differentiation between current, past use, and past experimentation. It makes the differentiation between nicotine and non-nicotine liquids, and it also measures frequency of use. Because if someone will become addicted from nicotine, he will become addicted from daily use, not from trial or from use once a month.
Donc l'Europe est plus précise sur...
Europe is much more precise, right? So this data is, these data are very positive, if I may say. What is the value? Because, sometimes we hear we cannot define today what is the rate of efficiency of e-cig in the, in quitting addiction, because we do not have these cohort studies. So what is the scientific value of these data which are linked to the survey?
I could show you the scientific data if you uploaded the new version of the presentation. Unfortunately, you have uploaded the old version, and there are some slides missing. So we have to upload the new version. Because in the new version, I have data about smoking cessation rate, which is very interesting. So this is the first version of the presentation I sent you. You didn't upload the yesterday's version. So if you want, I have the yesterday's version, which includes data about the efficacy of e-cigarettes as smoking cessation tools, which means, what's the proportion of e-cigarette users who have completely quit smoking. And it's very important because the European Union has presented a percentage of something like 14%, but within this, they include also the e-cigarette experimenters. Of course, you don't expect anyone who experiments with anything to be successful in quitting smoking. So what you should check is current or past regular use and how this affects experimentation. So I can continue until you upload the new one, and then we will focus only on the new slides.
Unfortunately, on n'aura pas le temps de...
Well, we won't have time, unfortunately, to upload this version. We'll make the update after the conference, if you agree.
I think it's very important. Believe me. It's much more interesting than anything else. So we'll go in France. Try to do it. And this is now data only for France. So from the 26,000 participants, 3,300 were interviewed in France. And this is the progress of smoking prevalence in France since 2006. There was a slight elevation in cigarette smoking from 2012 to 2014. It was one of the 4 countries where we saw an increase in smoking prevalence in Europe. E-cigarettes are second as a choice as a method for quit smoking, just after trying to quit without any assistance. So they are at the same rate as the NRTs, as you can see, 15%. the same as we observed in the whole Europe, current or former smokers are much more likely to be e-cigarette users compared to never smokers. So 23 times bigger chance of being an e-cigarette user when you are a smoker. Age, again, the same patterns as in the whole Europe. Males also more likely to be e-cigarette users compared to females. And educated people more likely to be using e-cigarettes compared to non-educated people. Advertisements, again, in France play a role, so they attract more users. And the more likely to become an e-cigarette user is when you think that e-cigarettes are not very harmful. Going to numbers, about more than 10 million e-cigarette users exist in France, 2 million of which are current regular users, 2.5 million past users, and 6.4 million experimenters just tried this cigarette. You see here, according to the smoking status, 8.2 million are current smokers, 1.6 million former smokers, so basically about 10 million, all of them. And less than 1 million are never smokers who have tried or are using e-cigarettes in France.
Alors, je me permets vous de couper.
Just a few words, because we've found the file, your file, we've uploaded it, and just the time to see it. Maybe a more general topic today, what is the feeling, your feeling, about the politicians? What do they think about this data? We have a lot of data accumulating. Yourself, you do publish a lot of articles in scientific reviews. Do you think that today people are listening more, about institutions and politicians?
It's not the same? It's not the one? Non, c'est pas le bon.
Vape Expo 2015.
Vape Expo?
So, concerning the political situation,
Vape Expo 2015, le fichier.
we are trying to communicate to the regulators and to the politicians about the relative risks of e-cigarettes compared to tobacco cigarettes, and I think the Public Health England report made a good, that's the one, made a good impact on that. However, the problem is that, for example, the Eurobarometer, all this data that I'm presenting were not reported by the European Union. They just reported that only 14% quit smoking, but they didn't go in depth. And I think that when you are seeing at the data, and especially the data about smoking cessation, you will see some very impressive numbers, and most likely the e-cigarettes are probably the most effective tools in quitting smoking. So here for Europe, let's go back a little bit. This is what the European Union presented, that 14% of e-cigarette users managed to quit smoking, 12.7% managed to quit smoking but then relapsed back to smoking. About 21% they reduced smoking consumption, which is also very important because it can be the first step towards quitting, but they didn't quit completely. 45% did not reduce at all the consumption, 3.8% said that they increased the consumption. So these numbers, and that's very important, refer to all e-cigarette users, current users, past users, and those who just tried the cigarettes. So what's happening when you just focus on current e-cigarette use? You see that 2.5 million people in Europe have quit smoking, and a further 2.2 million have reduced the smoking consumption. So in total, more than 4.5 million smokers have reduced their risk of developing disease by either quitting completely or reducing smoking consumption. And in percentage, it's really impressive. 35% have managed to quit smoking with e-cigarettes. It's one of the most impressive numbers and the rates of smoking cessation you can find. And also, look what's happening when you combine quitting with and reduced consumption. 67% have managed to either quit or reduce their cigarette consumption. It's an impressive number.
Ouais, exactement, 35%. Alors, mais
35% as compared to classical substitute. We have a lot of data accumulated because, you know, they're on the market for a long time. Which is the proportion?
About other methods, you mean? We know, for example, that NRTs have a success rate of 6-7% in 1 year. This data, we don't know for how long they have quit, but I mean, there are no questions on the Eurobarometer about other methods, so we don't have data. But for e-cigarette, it's not the 14% that they're presenting. This is for current users. So the people who are now regularly using e-cigarettes, almost 70% have a benefit because they have either completely quit smoking or have reduced the smoking consumption, and there is a chance that many of those who have reduced it will eventually quit. So these are really impressive numbers. So it shows that for the whole population, the e-cigarette has only benefits. Of course, there's going to be some people who will fail. So there was an 11.5% of people who quit but then relapsed, a 19.20% who experienced no reduction. But imagine that these are very low numbers compared to what we see with oral medications or with NRTs.
ces fameuses études où
These studies do follow the consumption, and we ask, you know, people, users, so do you still smoke, yes or no? And then we come back like 6 or 3 months later. What is the, you know, time frame when we can think that this product is very efficient for, you know, quitting addiction?
Unfortunately, in the Eurobarometer, they don't define a time frame, but usually you feel that if someone has managed to stay off cigarettes for 1 or 2 years, it's very unlikely that he will relapse after that. So the first year, basically the first year, but also the second year are the key time points at which you should remain off cigarettes with whatever method you are using. If you have succeeded to have a 2-year, for 2 years being smoke-free, then there is a chance that you may relapse, but the chance is much smaller.
Alors la question naturellement,
And of course, one of the main questions is the European Commission, when they will remake this kind of survey next year, will they ask the same people, the same questions and their habits of consumption, or shall we have, you know, a vision on 1, 2 or 3 years follow-up?
They do, because it is important. That's why they are doing the follow-up surveys to see how this phenomenon evolves. And of course, I think it's of vital importance because these questions are giving very valuable data for us. It's very important to continue asking about whether people have managed to quit and stay off cigarettes, what's the frequency of use, what's the difference between nicotine and non-nicotine liquids. These are vital questions which you never see in any other surveys, and I think that the Eurobarometer should set the example for other surveys too, especially in the US, which don't use such data. So, when you combine current and past e-cigarette use, so this is data about quitting smoking from all e-cigarette users who were regular are or were regular users. So we just excluded the experimenters. You see that 8.8 million smokers in the EU have quit or reduced consumption. Almost 4 million quit and almost 5 million reduced the consumption. There was 3 million who relapsed, expected, and 4.5 million who didn't manage to quit or reduce consumption. In percentages, you see a 22.6% cessation rate, a 28.6% further reduction rate, so 51%. I mean, it's a huge number. 51% is a huge number of people who have either quit or reduced their smoking consumption. So you see that the data hide a lot of evidence in favor of e-cigarettes that the EU avoided to report in their official report.
Alors on va devoir écourter, on arrive à la fin, mais ce qui est
We shall end our conference, but now here we have, very important data, existing data. It's a question of how we read it, how we shall face these data, how we shall interpret them, and which are the conclusions we may give to these data. In fact, the conclusions linked to these data in the European Union, we had, press releases, we had enormous differences between what you said and between what the Commission says.
Seeing just a couple of slides for France. Very important, nicotine use by never smokers in France is 0. There are only experimenters of nicotine-containing e-cigarettes among never smokers. There is no one who is using nicotine e-cigarette daily, weekly, monthly, or less than monthly. That's very important for France. And the smoking cessation rates for France, have a look, current e-cigarette use, almost 40% quit rate in France with e-cigarettes among current users. And more than 75% quit or reduced cigarette consumption. Dausenberg should be aware of this data, So the success rate is bigger than 50%, which is, unheard of for any other product used to quit or to reduce smoking.
Donc aujourd'hui, on peut dire sans mentir.
So we can say without lying and being very clear with someone who doesn't know anything about e-cig that I am a European citizen, and in the European community, yes, e-cig can enable to have an efficiency rate between 35 and 40% of efficiency. Right? Is that what you say?
In France, it's even bigger than in the whole European Union, and it's basically 3/4 of smokers who use a cigarette have benefits in terms of either completely quitting or reducing consumption. And when you compare you use in France current and past cigarette use, again, you have almost 50% of the population who manage to quit or reduce smoking consumption among current and past e-cigarette users. So we are excluding experimenters, as we said, because when you experiment with something, you don't expect it to succeed. So the numbers are much higher than what the EU reported, are really impressive, and probably unseen in any other kind of smoking cessation, medication, or other method. So it's really extremely important. So as a conclusion, that's what we can say from the Eurobarometer. This cigarette is basically used by smokers and ex-smokers, very rarely used by never smokers, more prevalent in educated people, which is a difference with what's happening with smoking. The advertisements and communicating correctly that e-cigarettes are of low risk are very important in attracting smokers into the e-cigarette. Dual nicotine users among never smokers is a very rare incidence, so there is no risk of having a lot of people becoming addicted through e-cigarettes. There is nothing like that. It just remains a theoretical concern. Smoking cessation or reduction of smoking among current or past regular e-cigarette users is, what I say, impressive. Really, the numbers are impressive. So there is no getaway to smoking, there is no renormalization of smoking, there is no addiction from e-cigarette use, and there is a lot of benefit among smokers when they are using e-cigarettes.
Alors on va finir, dernière question. Parce que...
Last question, and in fact these data are quite impressive. We have all this data here. We did not invent anything, and in fact we must acknowledge there is a quite scientific war. You say this and the others say that. People do not agree on that. We have different ideas. And have you received any criticism about your interpretation of this Eurobarometer?
Wait, it's not an interpretation. It's the statistical analysis of the database that I downloaded from the European Union. So it's not my study, it's their study. The questions are theirs. The answers is what they provided in the database. And this is a simple statistical analysis. There is going to be absolutely no dispute because we used the basic statistical methods that are used by anywhere. And it's not our study, so they cannot accuse us for being biased and asking, only people who like cigarettes. It was a study which was performed by the European Union. We only analyzed the data, and we did an in-depth analysis, much deeper than what the European Union did. So there can be no dispute. These are the numbers. I mean, if you have 10 people analyzing the data, they will find the same numbers. That's it.
C'est publié aujourd'hui.
Is it already published?
Be proud. It's the first time that we are presenting this data anywhere. So this is the first time that these data have been shown, and we are preparing now the manuscript to submit it for publication for the whole Europe. But I think it would be nice also to publish the data for France only.
D'accord, alors on se rappellera bien.
So of course we'll keep in mind this exceptional session. Many thanks for your participation, and 35 to 40% of users can quit tobacco. So many thanks, and quit smoking. So these data will be also published and released. And anyway, for you it was the first time, and we did not invent them. These data come from the European community, as Dr. Fasalino said. It's not interpretation. It's just a very accurate reading. So I think it's really impressive, and many thanks to you all and for your participation.